Welcome to the second class for building reactive documents using Mithril.js. So just to recap the previous class, we opened up Mithril, we played around with some static and dynamic content, and I also talked about the motivation, which was using the Tangle, using Tangle as a basis for what we're trying to build. In this one, we're going to start by understanding how we can inject some dynamic content within Mithril.js. Through the use of HTML forms. So before we do that, let's talk about what is the final goal we want to do. Within Tangle, we have this reactive and dynamic parts of the document. Now, when I drag this, you can see that the number of cookies increases and also the number of calories that we consume increase likewise. So what we're going to be building in this class is building this particular dynamic form. We want to be able to drag a slider or input type equals range that is part of the HTML forms, and we want the value of the form to be shown dynamically and changed dynamically as part of this document. So let's look at how we can do that. So to start off with, let's talk very high level about how might we do this in Mithril, and it's actually on the very front page. So in Mithril, if you want to add a new DOM element and you want to add some new content, the syntax for doing that is you use the M function. The very first argument is the name of the particular element you want to use. So in this case, it's H1, and the second argument can be one of two things. In this particular first case, it is what the tag wraps around. So in this case, the name of my first app is what the tag will be displaying. So we'll have a H1 tag, and inside the content of the H1 tag is my first app. If you have some additional attributes you want to add to the tag, you can do this using the braces notation, as you can see down here. And in this case, the second argument, it will be populated in the second argument, which will be the attributes of the particular class, and the third argument will be what the tags actually encapsulate. So I'm going to skip through here because I feel that this is fairly basic, and let's jump straight into a form. Rather than reading through all that, let's just go and look at the answer and the solution. So here we have a simple form, and you can see that there's an interactive component as we click on this. The very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do the same edits as I did in the previous video, which is let's just change this to Markdown, because I believe that it is good practice to separate the static and dynamic content. So I'm going to call this my first app. I'm going to make this a capital F and a capital A just to distinguish the change here from the part that is in the Mithril component of it. And I'm going to create a new div with the ID of slider. And I'm going to add my description at the bottom just to show that everything works. All right, now we're going to have a look at what is changed and what's different. The very first thing you can see is that there is a new variable here, which called hello, which is an object, and it has the key of view, which is a function. So this is a bit that adds our interactivity. So let's firstly just make this so that we can separate the two components again by ID, and I think I called this slider. Yep. So now hopefully it will update and you can see that now we have two headings. So let's just delete the very first one because that's quite useless. It doesn't really help us. And let's have a look at the button. So how do these components work? The easiest way in terms of understanding how this works is, well, to change it to something that we want. So the very first thing that we're going to do is we're going to change the input to type range. When we do that, we will get a range thing, but we don't have any indication of what this value is. In fact, well, this is actually quite useless. So we're just going to add some attributes to our range slider, and for argument's sake, I'm going to make the minimum to be 0, the maximum to be 100, and I'm going to make the step size of 5. Now from here, let's just leave things as they are at this point in time, and what we're going to do is, well, we need to have some way of assigning the value to it. So if I create, or if I assign the value of this slider to count, which was created from the previous button object, hopefully when it refreshes, you'll see that the slider jumps all the way to 0, because that's where the minimum is. Now, if I change this to negative 100, you will see that this will jump back down into the middle, hopefully, because that's where the midpoint is. But let's just stick to make a 0 for now. Before we continue, I'm going to make the count to be called val, because that seems more syntactically correct. So I'm just going to change all of this. Now this bit, because input doesn't actually have or show anything, like the correct way in HTML land is to either use label or something else, so I'm just going to delete this as well. All right, now how do we show what is the actual value of the slider? So to do that, we can add a new element to the DOM. So let's do this by saying range slider, and the value here will be val. All right, so hopefully this will build, and now hopefully when we move the slider, the values will change. All right, so let's move it, and it didn't change. Oh, it did change there. So it changed, but it doesn't, it just snaps back to some arbitrary value. So what's happened here? What's happened here is that it triggers the onClick function, which just does a value +1. But this isn't really what we want, because we don't want the range slider to increment by 1 every single time we click on it. So for example, right now, if I actually want to go backwards, it will actually go forwards instead, if it works. So, or it didn't work at all. So there's some very weird behavior going on. The simple fix to this is to change the assignment to be equal to this.value. So then when you move the slider, oh, sorry, wasn't meant to save. When you move the slider, it will go back to the value that you've moved it to. Also, it's probably incorrect to use onClick. Instead, we should probably use onInput. So now when I move the slider, the value in the slider should also change respectively. So let's see if this works. So now you can see when I move the slider, it updates automatically to the correct value, and it is very fluid and dynamic. So there we have it. We have demonstrated how we can add a slider and how it would work. That's one last check. If I change this to 55, it should bounce to that value rather than at the very bottom of the slider. So there we go. Thank you for watching the second class of this course. In the last and next class, we will finally wrap up and talk about how we complete the implementation of the Tangle JavaScript library within using Mithril by just implementing the cookie example. So I hope to see you then.